today is an introduction to a framework called Express, which is actually designed so that you can develop web applications easily. So we will see what the difference is between that and using Node.js directly. So today is the first of two parts during which you will learn how to do this properly. As you can see, we have quite a bit of stuff to get through, a bit of introduction to Node.js, and then how you set up an HTTP server using Node.js, and then we will move on to Express, the web framework using which you can actually set up a server quite a bit easier, and also do a lot of the things that you will need to do in a much easier fashion, because Express is actually designed specifically to help you deal with web serving. And after that, we will move on to HTML forms, because that's what makes web applications interactive. You send some data to the web server, and the web server responds in response to the data that you sent, and that makes the whole thing interactive. Finally, while sending data to the web server, in our case something that is running Express, we have to validate the inputs coming from the user, not on the client side, not at the Chrome side, but on the server side. That is very important. We'll see why it is important and how we can do it. So that's the agenda for today. Node.js is a runtime that was actually ripped out of Chrome and then made into a standalone application which can actually start serving stuff from the server. So if it is part of Chrome, as you know, Chrome is a web client, so it's a client-side facility, client-side functionality, but this has been moved to the server side, or we have the option of moving to the server side because it's a standalone application. And the advantage of that is that once you know how to do JavaScript programming, you can do the work on the front end, the client side, or on the server side. And for that reason, it has become very popular. So how do you set up a server and how do you actually run it? So we have seen this a couple of times before. What you would do is to have a file called a server.js, and then in order to run it, from a command prompt attached to the current folder where this file server.js resides, you will just issue that command. So that is the command that you will issue, and then whatever server.js is trying to output to the console will appear right there, right after this command, and then it will be listening on the port that it is set up to listen to. So that's the idea. So as long as this command is active, meaning you haven't killed it, the computer, your laptop, is actually listening on a port, and it can actually respond to requests coming on that port. If you want to kill it for whatever reason, you will use Control-C to kill it. Of course, after you kill it, nobody is listening on port number 8000 or whatever port it is that you set it up to listen to. So if you go to the website like that, then it will basically say it cannot be reached because there's nothing, nobody is home. So that's what it is. So let's look at a simple server here. For our purposes, we'll be using only Express from now on, but it's probably instructive to understand what this is doing, because I believe we have all the knowledge necessary to understand this completely at this point. So this is Wk4, example 1, and there's a server.js, and this is the file that you want to see. What you see in line number 4 is a require statement, require HTTP, and that is a module. And that module is actually a core module of Node.js. So you don't really have to actually specify where it is coming from. Node knows how to load it because it is in some library search path. And what comes back to you is actually an object defined in http.js as module.exports. So that will come back to you. That's an object. An object has properties as well as methods. And here there is a method. This method create server. Here there is this method create server. And that is the method that we'll be using. And what does it do? It actually creates a server, of course. But what's the input to that method? Input is like a method is like a function. So it takes some argument. In this case, what it is taking is a function. So you can see that from here to here, that is a pointer function. That pointer function takes two arguments, req, which is a request, and res, which is response. So these being function parameters or function arguments, they're dummy variables. You could call it anything you want. You could call it request and response explicitly, or if you want to be cryptic, maybe R1 and R2. Those things don't matter. It's just that you have to be consistent. If you call it R1 here, it'll have to be R1 here, R1 here. Similarly, if you call this R2, all these things will have to be R2, and that's it. But let's stay with REQ and RES. And what this function, this pointer function is doing is looking at the request URL property. So request is an object and object has a property URL and it's looking at it. And if that property is slash means after HTTP localhost port number, you haven't typed in anything. By default it is slash. If it is that and the request method, so method is another property of the object request. If that is get, then it sets the response status code to be 2000, which means it succeeded. Then it sets a header saying that what I'm sending back to you is text, that is called the MIME type of whatever is coming back to the client. And then it just sends this message and that's the end of the response. Hello from the server. So if you go to HTTP localhost 8000, once the server is up and running, you will just see hello from the server. So let's actually try to do this. So we have to run this. We will run this from Visual Studio Code. So I start a terminal here and the terminal will have to be attached to Wk4 examples, example 1, not example 2. Right now I'm in example 2. So I'll go one level up, then example 1 there. And then here, in order to run this server, I would say node server.js, and now it is running. How do I know it is running? Because in line number 16, after having defined the localhost and 17, the port number, I make the call in line number 20 saying this server, please listen on port number 8000 and the localhost. And what does it do when it hits this statement? It basically does this. Once it starts listening, it says server running at HTTP, host name which is localhost, port number which is 8000. So you will see server running at HTTP localhost 8000, and that's the message that you see here, and that message comes from line number 21. But let's actually go to this server and see what happens. By that I mean let's go to localhost 8000 and see what happens. Now one thing that you have to remember is that even though you're specifying host name here, it has to be localhost. It cannot be anything else in our context. For WAD1, when you're running it from your laptop, you cannot get fancy here and try to type in something else like your host, my host, or whatever. It just will not work. So it has to be localhost. So now I go to localhost 8000, as you can see here in the address bar here, and that just says hello from the server. Where does that come from? It comes from here. So once the server is up and running, whenever there is a request, it runs from here and it looks at the request URL, which was just slash. As you can see here, there's nothing else after that by default. That just means it's slash. And the method was get, that is the default method also. And then it just sent a message. In the response, it just sent the text message saying hello from the server. And that's what you saw here. Now what I want to do is to kill this server, which is Control-C, and after that if I try to reload it, the site cannot be reached because there is nobody listening on port number 8000 on the local host. So the server cannot be reached, the site cannot be reached. So that's that. Now even though this is the first way of doing stuff, we will not be doing it this way. We will be actually using Express, a framework, which is not a core module of Node.js. It's actually something you have to install. Is a package that you have to install. So installing a package might sound like a daunting task, but it's not. It's just there is a package manager called npm node package manager, and that makes the whole thing very easy. The problem with installing packages is that one package will depend on other packages, and you have to track the dependency tree and make sure that everything is installed properly. But npm will do that for you. You don't have to worry about that at all. Right. So the first thing to do is to actually say that the folder that you're working with is actually an npm project. So you have to say npm init in that folder. So let's do that in example 2. Now let's go back to example 2 in our terminal. One way of doing that, of course, is to cd to example 2. I know it is there. Another way of doing that, let me show that to you. Let me kill this terminal and then right click on example 2 and then say open integrated terminal, and that will open it and go to example 2. So right now it's in example 2. So that's a bit easier. The trouble with this is that this works only on Mac properly. When you do this on Windows, it will open a terminal, but that will be what they call a PowerShell. What we want to do is not a PowerShell in Windows. We want to do a command prompt. So what you will have to do is to click on this little arrow here and then find command prompt there on Windows, and that will make it a command prompt, but at the same time it will change the directory again back to somewhere else. So the fact that you right clicked and went there doesn't really help you much. So Windows, no good. We are in week 4. We are in example 2, and we were looking at server.js. This is a file, and this package.json, we're going to delete it. So that thing is not there. And of course, node modules also we don't want at this point. We'll delete it. So we'll be creating those things using npm. So let's go back to the slides. So the first thing that we will say is npm init, and that will create that package.json file that you just saw. So let's do that here. I'm in example 2 right now. I'll just say npm init. Now it asks me a bunch of questions. The package name, example 2 is fine, version is fine, description and entry point is server.js, test command, nothing, git repository, nothing, keywords, nothing, author, nothing, license, whatever. And this type is important because this package in Node.js and also in WAD1 will be using CommonJS, as you remember. So we have to say CommonJS, and everything is fine, say yes. So as you saw, I just said yes to everything. For that reason, we might as well say npm init -y, which will just assume that you just want to say yes to everything. So it did the whole thing once again. If you don't believe me, let me delete this guy and do this once more. Now the guy came back and it's the same thing. So you can see that the main entry point is called server.js. So that's the first thing that we did. We basically said that this is a project. Project just means a bunch of files, presumably in a folder that are logically, virtually linked together as a project. And all that this command npm init did was to create this. This didn't do anything more than that. So it's not so mysterious, it's just that. Okay, so we saw that. Now at this point, our server is a plain vanilla Node.js server, but we want to make it an Express server. We want to use the framework Express, so we need to install the Express framework, which is actually very easy to do. What we will do is to say npm install Express. This is all you need to do. Npm install Express. Express is a module name, install is install, npm is a package manager. So it did that work, and as you can see, it created one extra file there, which is a big file with all the dependencies and the corresponding version numbers, etc. And also downloaded a bunch of things into the current folder. And the last thing that it did was to update this package.json to say that there is a dependency on Express. So that's what it did. So that's very simple. And now you can see in the slide, what we have is similar to this. Start is node server.js. So it's basically saying that there is a command called test that npm can run. There's another command called start that npm can run. So you could start the server by saying node server.js. That is one way of doing it. That's one way of doing it. You could also say npm run start, in which case it'll just go here, find that npm script called start, and then it'll just run it. So let's do it that way. So it actually went there, said I'm running start, and the start script basically said node server.js, as you can see in line 8, and then the output of that is here. Why is that the output? As you can see, when the server is up and running, so it'll say server is running in HTTP hostname, which is localhost, port 8000, and that's what you see here. Okay. So we did this, we initialized our project with or without -y, so that we got JSON, the package description as a data file, and then we said npm install Express. I is a shortcut for that, so you don't have to type in install completely, you can just say I. And then all the dependencies of the module, of the package that you're creating, which is called example 2 here, this package, that has a dependency on Express, and there is a big dependency tree below this, because Express will depend on 65 other packages, which is all there in package lock JSON. This you don't have to worry about. npm will take care of that. If for some reason Express actually changes and it needs something more, when you install it again, it will just pick out the right dependencies and just update this file. You just don't worry about it. You don't mess with this file at all. It is just there. Right, now we installed the Express package, but we also might want to install another package called nodemon. That is something to monitor. Let me actually illustrate what the problem is before actually we get to the solution. So here, server is running at this host at this port number, and the server is going to respond to slash. Now, suppose I want to respond to not slash, but let's say Manoj, and I just want to modify this to say hello from the server, hello to Manoj from the server. I'm just changing something. I save it. Now I go back to my Chrome window here, reload it. It says hello from the server. Even though I have modified it, that modification hasn't come through because the original server was running. So what I'll need to do is to kill this and then run it again, either by npm run start or by saying node server.js. They are the same. So this time let me just run it using this. And now if I reload it, it cannot actually handle that because slash doesn't exist anymore. Remember, we modified if the URL is Manoj, do this. If the URL is anything else, don't do anything. So it is just hanging there. So let me actually try to do slash Manoj this time. Now it says hello to Manoj from the server. Okay, so we saw that while we are actually developing, we will be messing with server.js. We will have to do this over and over again. Every time you'll have to go to the terminal, kill it, restart it, which is a pain. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a program, an application that was monitoring whether this file has changed, and it would relaunch the server every time the file is changed? In fact, it's not merely this file. Later you will actually have server.js and then things that are standing behind it, things like account.js, order.js, etc. that are all we will start calling them routes, and any one of them can change, and then it's a pain to actually go back here and then kill it and then come back. So you might ask, is there a monitoring program that will actually do this for you? Glad you asked. There is, and it is called nodemon. So that is something that we will install. And since this nodemon is likely to be used by a whole bunch of other projects, not merely this example 2, you might want to install it globally. So there is a flag, an option -g that will install it globally. So that's what we will do for nodemon. Now, when you're installing something globally, it's actually installing stuff in the system folder, and normal users cannot actually do that. You need to be a super user. So for that reason, macOS, which is a very secure system, will ask you for an admin password. On Windows, you don't really need the admin password. It's a slightly less secure system, and it'll let you do that. So let's actually install this. So before doing that, I'm going to kill this. I'm going to show you how it is done. It is npm install. I told you that the shortcut was just I, and we need the flag or the option -g to say that is a global installation, and the package I'm installing is nodemon, Node.js monitor, nodemon. So this is what I want to do, but I'm on a Mac. When I hit a return, it gives me a whole bunch of errors. Basically, not have permissions to access these files. So what I need to do is to install it as the super user. Luckily for me, there is a command called sudo on Mac. This is only for Mac. Sudo exists only on Mac. On Windows, you don't need it. If you get an error on Windows, this is not the solution. You will have to do something else. So here I'll just say sudo npm i -g nodemon, and at this point it asks me for the password. The password is my user password because I'm actually super user, just that I'm not assuming the privileges of super user when I'm doing normal things. So I just type in my password. When you're typing in stuff here at this password prompt, nothing will occur, nothing will move. There's no start or anything. So don't think that nothing is going in. Things are going into the keyboard, into the terminal. So don't do it over and over again. Okay, I typed in my password, hit a return, and then it goes and does that stuff. Okay, now the dependency here in my example package hasn't changed because even though it actually depends on nodemon, but that is installed system-wide, so it's not a dependency for this particular package. The benefit of having installed nodemon is that instead of saying node server.js, I can say nodemon server.js, and let's see what the difference is. So instead of saying node server.js, I'm going to say nodemon server.js. So now it gives me some colorful output, and then it actually goes ahead and starts this, but at this time it's actually monitoring it. I can restart it at any point. If I want to restart it by hand, I just type in rs. It actually does that. But better than that, suppose I go and modify something here. Suppose I want to say, instead of hello to Manoj, I want to say hello to Prof Manoj. It's a modification of that. Save it. The server has restarted by itself. So you don't have to do this on your own. So So you see that restarting due to changes. So that is the best part. So nodemon will monitor a bunch of files, in particular JS and all the corresponding module files called star.mjs or star.cjs, etc. And that will be taken care of automatically. Good. So that's the benefit of that. Now you had the start command there, but maybe you want to create one more command, the value of which is a bit of a suspect, but let's do that anyway. You probably want to say, give another command called nodemon server.js instead of node server.js. This is just defining another command. Notice that there is a comma, that is the format of JSON data files. So after each key value pair in the data file, you need a comma. The last one, of course, doesn't need a comma, but it will tolerate a comma. If you put a comma here, that's not an error, but it obviously doesn't need it. So maybe you want to do that for the sake of completion. So I'm going to create one more called nodemon. It is just nodemon server.js. Save it, and as you can see, the server actually restarted because my package.json changed. Now let me kill this, and I can say npm run nodemon, because npm run will look for a script in here and it'll see nodemon, and that will be run. So it is identical to running nodemon server.js, which is identical to running this, except that there is a monitoring facility. So this was actually exercise 1. We did it in example 1, but it's the same as exercise 1. So I would invite you to actually do this in exercise 1, not in the solutions, because the solution already has all these things, but separately, starting from the in-class exercise. We illustrated the use of rs to restart so as we saw, a change in package.json will actually re-trigger the nodemon to restart the server. If you don't like it, there are ways of customizing it, but for our purpose in this course, maybe these advanced options are not necessary. So Express is the framework that we will be using starting the next example. So we already installed it for the current example 2. The next project in example 3 will depend on Express. So it's a lightweight toolkit to handle everything that you need to do with a server, and this is a very popular. There are other modules built on top of Express or independent ones, but this is the one we'll be using for WAD1. So do not use anything else for WAD1. If you want to get familiar with other things, sure, you can do those things on your own time, but for our purposes for WAD1, including the project, please use only Express. So let's go to example 3 and let's actually do the installation once more. This may already be done in the version that you downloaded from eLearn, but I'm going to do this once more. So let me kill this guy, go to example 3. Here, right now I'm here, I need npm init, and I have a package.js and I have script test and start, all good. Now I'm going to say npm install express, because this project depends on Express. So I see the dependency here, very good, and I can see all the modules have come through, and there is a module version tracking facility there as a JSON file, all good. The command that I issued is npm install, or what is it showing you here is npm install and. What that does is it installs npm, and if that command succeeds, that's what this and does in shell language. If that succeeds, then the next one is done. If that failed, then the next one is not done. So in my case, it actually succeeded, so I can issue the next command. But if I wanted to be a little fancier, I could have said npm I express and nodemon server.js. This I could have done. So as you can see, it actually ran npm I express, which means it's installed Express again. That's okay, it's harmless, and then it started this. If you want to see it fail and not do the second part, let's do one more thing. I know that if I try to install nodemon globally, it should fail unless it has cached my password, which it probably hasn't. So if I say npm I -g nodemon, this first command should fail, and then the second one should not start. So error, and it exited there. It did not try to do the second part. So that's this that's our shell language, which you will learn later in your IS career, but don't worry about it now. Now let's go and take a look at localhost 8000 after having started the server. So hello from server, where is that coming from? that is now coming from example 3, server.js. Here it says if the request is slash, then say hello from server. Let's actually start from the beginning of this file and go step by step. Here, the first thing that we do in line number 4 is to require express. So require, as you know, means it's actually looking for express.js somewhere and loading it, which means whatever you have as module.exports inside express.js or whatever is equivalent to that will come back to you in this local variable called express. Now what has come back to you is an object, and it's actually a function object. This is called the default export that we learned as a third way of exporting or something last week. And so this is a function which you can run directly, and it's also an object, so it's got properties and methods within. So you can run it, and what it gives you is a server, is an express server. And then server can handle get request by just specifying server.get, and the arguments to that is what we call a route. So if the request is actually for slash, the server can respond to request to slash, which very soon we'll call a route. So let's go through this code once more, this time on the slide. The first thing that we did was to import express, the module that we have installed, into a variable which is actually a function object now. So it's a function, so it can be called directly. It's a default export, and the output of that is a server, and you can set up get request to the root URL slash. Whenever it hits slash, just say hello from the server and then start listening. And this part down here is identical to what we saw before. Remember, it's port number first and then host name, not the other way around, which might seem more logical actually. So let's just to compare the core Node.js server and the express server. Here we are importing HTTP, which is a core module. Here we are importing express, which is a module that we have installed. Then we are using the method create server inside the HTTP object that came from http.js somewhere, and that's what we are setting up here. And everything that you need to say in the response, you have to actually do by hand. On the other hand, for express, you're responding to a get request that is indicated by the fact that you're saying server.get, and what you're responding to is this, and what you will get is the output of this function. So let's take a step back and explain what a route is. So server.get sets up a route. Server.get sets up a route in response to a get request, and what it is responding to is this first argument. Here in this case it's slash, that is the root of your web server. So whenever it sees that, the route basically says, whenever you see this, please perform the action specified in the next argument, which is a function. So the next argument starting here, ending here, is a function. As you can see, it's a narrow function that takes request and response, much like it did here. So once again, a route is a way in which you can say that when you get a request to this path, this specified path, which is the first argument, do whatever the second argument says, which is a function. So it's like a receptionist in an organization. When a delivery comes in, she would redirect the delivery man to the delivery room. If it is a mail, then mail room, and if it is to the CEO or something, to CEO's receptionist, etc. So it's just basically redirecting, routing the request to different places, which is why it's called a route. Now, one facility that is used all the time is the ability to serve static files. How do you serve static files? What are static files? They are files of the kind images or HTML files that don't change. Even things like style sheets and JavaScript that are meant to be run on the client side, they're all static files. The standard way of doing that is to put all these files in a location called public within your package. In this case, it's going to be example 3. So you will create a folder called public, and there you can start putting things. And after that, you can specify just one command saying express.static, where the root is, and some options, and that is good enough. So what you will do is just to say express.static public. This, by and large, should work. There will be some modifications to that you will see, but this is the idea. Function signature of this method static is just the place where you want to put your static resources. The refinement that you will apply to that is the fact that you want to say the root of public folders is not just public folder anywhere, but under the current folder. What's the current folder? Current folder is where the server.js file resides. So you want to say the current folder plus /public. That's where we want to put it. And this __ did name is one of those magic variables that are filled automatically. That will be for any script that is running the location of that script. So for server.js, if you're doing that in example 3, that will be just is113 week4 example 3. We will actually do this in example 4, so it's going to be that. So magic variables are important and something that we have to get used to. And there are magic functions also that different languages have. Now, one problem is that when you create a folder name, if you're on Unix-like systems like Mac OS, then it is /. If you're on Windows, it's /, but two of them, because // will have to be escaped. So on Windows, this is the way it has to be. On Mac, this is the way it has to be. So it's probably better to use a built-in facility to do either this or that, depending on the operating system. And there is such a facility in a core module called path. So you would import path, this is a core module, and then use the method called join the dir name with public. So that will put either this or that, depending on the operating system. So let's actually do this in example 4. Example 3 is done, example 1 is done, example 4. So there is a server.js, as you can see it's express, there is a path, and then we're using express.static to specify the location of static files, and we are saying use that in response to anything that comes to /. So server.use is a way in which you can specify that any request to / should be looked for as a static resource inside the current folder, which is example 4, inside public here, and if it is there, serve it. If it is not there, then it will continue. We'll try to resolve it using some other rules that are below it. So let's kill the previous server. Go to example 4. So we have to launch server.js. And if you look in package.js, it says that it depends on Express, but looks like Express is not installed here because you don't see a package log file. So let's actually just try running it first. Node server.js. It gives me an error basically saying it cannot find module express. So the next thing that we will do is to actually say npm install express. If it succeeds, then nodemon server.js. I could say nodemon or node. I know that nodemon is there because we installed it globally in example 2 or something. So it's already there. Let's try this. So now it succeeds because it's installed Express and then launched a nodemon for this. You can see that it created package log and it created node modules. Then in public, I have images and my.html, those things. Now we should be able to serve because in our server, we have server use and any request to / should be interpreted as a static resource request and look for it inside the public folder right here. So let's see if that works. So we will try to open this guy, which is my dog, inside images dog. So let's try that. So here we will go and say my.html, my.html, my lovely dog. It works perfectly fine. So the thing to notice here is that this / here is not merely to handle request to /, but anything that starts with a /. So all requests to the web server, anything that you type in after here will be looked for in the public folder first. So my.html is the one that we looked at, but we can actually directly access this also. That also is a static file. So we could say images dog.jpg. That also is accessible. Now there is this little technical thing that dog.jpg was an image, not a text file, while mydog.html was a text file. All those things are handled by this guy, so we don't have to worry about the MIME type of different files, etc. All those things are handled by Express for you. Very good. So we saw that we're using the core module called path to join the location of the current file server.js and the string public properly, whether it is by a / or a // all those things will happen properly. And then we're saying that the server should use this static location whenever the path matches this guy, which means path starts with that guy. So server.use will mount what we call a middleware express.static. At this point, probably it's instructive to look at the way server.js was written earlier and how it is written using the Express framework. So originally when we wrote server.js earlier in week 1 through 3, we had our server.js talking directly with Node.js using the HTTP module which is a core module of Node.js. So what we were doing was to talk to Node.js directly using the core modules in there, and that basically meant that every time you wanted to do something, you had to explicitly code those things yourself. So if you're requesting a static file, you have to set it up, and if it's a text file, you have to say that the MIME type is text. If it is image, you have to say it's image. If it is a video, you have to say it's video, etc. So it's a lot of work, a lot of cases to be handled. All those things were implemented in Express for you. In the original case, we have our application talking directly to Node.js, but starting this week, we installed the module Express, and instead of talking to Node.js, we started talking to Express, and Express will mediate all our interactions with Node, and that makes everything a lot easier. So the fact that we needed to install Express was a walk in the park because we had access to the package manager, and then Express will handle all the HTTP negotiations for you with the built-in HTTP. So in example 4, we saw that all the static files could be used and served using just one call to a method in Express. The next thing we want to learn is routing. We saw that in the beginning that we could say server.get to respond to a GET request, and the first thing there, the first argument there is a URL path or the route that we are matching. This is explicit full matching, and when the request is that, we will perform the action specified in the function that follows. This is typically a pointer function, but it could be a named function also if you want it to be. So that is what routing is. Like I said earlier, routing basically redirects request to a function. Similarly, if there is a request to say /account/login, for instance, that can be redirected to a different function, again an anonymous function there, and you can do what you need to do when there is a request to log in somebody. So the request can be of two types. It could be GET, which is a default request in HTTP, but it could be POST. When you're trying to send some data to the server in a slightly more secure fashion, you would use POST. So the basic routing is just responding to / If it is a GET request, you will say a GET request is received. If it is POST, a POST request is received. This is just an example. Typically, obviously, you will do something much more complicated than this. Or if you're sending a GET request to a specific path, let's say about, then you have to respond to that. And you can say this, for instance, the response contains just this string. And then there is this facility of using regular expressions, which is a big can of worms that you will have to learn at some point. Here, what you see here, this looks like a string, but if you're careful to notice, there is no quotation mark there. Instead of that, it starts with a /, ends with a /. That means it's a regular expression in JavaScript. This regular expression basically says any pattern that has an A in it, do this. So it's a very powerful thing, and regular expression has very rich syntax to handle very specific patterns. Okay, the second thing that we need to know is that if it is a GET request, then the request object that you get here will contain a query property, which is itself an object. It's got a lot of information about what the query is about. And the request also has a body that contains key value pairs from the requested body. In response, you can send a response back to the server, you can redirect, and you can set the status of the HTTP response. So 200 is a succeeded, 300 is a redirect, and 404, you know what 404 is. It's a failure. 500 plus would be server-side failures. So you can set it if you want to. One thing to keep in mind is that if it is a GET request, the request parameters, if there's a query string is the stuff that appears after the URL with a question mark, key value pairs, and ampersand delimiting multiple queries. Those things will appear in request.query, of course. And if it is a POST request, then the information that is posted will appear inside request.body, but with one proviso that we will have to understand. So let's actually start doing this in example 5. So we are supposed to go to example 5 and then say npm install and add nodemon. Now you might wonder why there is no argument there. In other words, you might wonder why we are not specifying what to install. We will see. And after that, we want to open this and this. So example 4 is done. So let's kill this. So let's go to example 5 and issue the command npm install and nodemon server.js. Notice that I'm not saying what to install. Let's see what happens. It actually installed Express. Why? Because in my package.json I had the dependency Express and that got installed, and then it was the server was launched, and the server says this: as usual, Express require Express, and then server is created as an Express server, and then the route / is set to say hello from the server, and the route / about is set to this is an about page. Now let's go and get this. So it says hello from the server, and if I want to go to about, this is the about page. So those things work as expected. So this is how you set up different routes. Good. So example 5 is done. So we saw that about is set up here, and when there is a request, a get request, it's a get request because all requests are get by default unless you create a form and say that the method is post, everything else is get. Now this is all fine as far as it goes, but it is likely that you might have a bunch of routes that should be logically together, such as let's say you have something called a login and say register. So login, a login form, then you type in something and hit the submit button. It has to be handled by some login route somewhere, and then if you are not registered, then there should be a registered route somewhere, and if you are registered and then you want to change your password, there is change password somewhere, or if you forget your password, forgot password route, or change your username or whatever. There might be a bunch of things related to your account logically together. So it might be better, instead of implementing each one of the routes inside your server.js, it might be better if you put all those things together and place them somewhere else and then imported that. And that facility is called a router. So router is almost like a server, it's like a mini server, and it can be imported in your server.js, and all the methods inside the router are similar to the ones that you will see in server. So instead of defining all routes in server.js, which will pollute it and make it very big and might make it unmaintainable, unwieldy, so we will be using this. So that is in example number 6. So we're going to create 2 routes here, about route and then home route, and we'll proceed as per normal, npm I and then nodemon server.js, and then you will see how these things are handled. So we are done with example 5. Then we go to example 6. So we say cd / example 6, and we will npm install and nodemon server. Fine, that is launched. I will kill this and this. In example 6 we have a server right here, and it's saying that home routes should come from routes, home route. And routes, that is like a convention, the name for that folder, much like the name for the folder for static files was public. Here in this case all the routes will be put in routes just below the package root. Okay, so then you will say require home route and home route, so there will be a home route.js. So let's open that. Then there we have to say require thingy once more because it's a different file, and there we are creating a router, and that is done by a method called router within the Express class. And there all I'm doing is just handling this route. So this is much like server.get, it's just that it's router.get. So it's this. So whenever you see this, respond by sending this string, because whenever you see this you're supposed to run this function, and that function just attaches this string to the response. That's what it does. So let's go back to server. It says I created home routes by requiring that. So I have a route object now. Then I'm just specifying the function here. I'm just specifying the object there. So just go and delegate all the requests to this object, and that object knows how to handle /. That's what it will do. Similarly, if you look at about route, if you see / in this case, what you're going to say is this is the about page. Again, we have to understand what that / means. Here I'm attaching server.use about to about routes. So that means whenever I see about, that goes to this object here, and there after about there's nothing else. That's what this slash means. So whatever you see here, the string that you see here, is what happens after the first argument of use. So that you have to keep in mind. So let's see this in action. So the functionality of this is not very different from what we did before. So hello from the server, and this is about. So this is the about page. Just to make sure that we are actually using these files, let's make a modification here. This is the about page from the router. So I relaunched it because I modified some JS file. Similarly, home route, hello from the server from the router. Now it actually says from the router. So it's actually using that include file, that import file, which contains the router. Okay, so that's how you do it. It's a dot use, it's not dot get anymore. That dot get is actually done inside this file or this file, or it could be dot post also, depending on what it is that you're handling as a request. It could be a post request or a get request. Now there is an exercise here. This I'm going to leave to you to do because it's an exercise, not an example. We will continue with form handling. The way the form is handled is by displaying a form in user's browser first. So first there is a get request to get the form, which will be just a static HTML file typically, and that will come back to you. That contains the form, and then the user will fill in whatever it is that he wants to fill in, and then that will be sent back to the server, and that method can be either get or post. The first one is always a get, but the second one can be get or post. And in response to the data that is being posted, sent, some action can be taken, and the HTML output that will come back to the browser will depend on the data that is sent in. Hopefully that is the way it is done. So get is the default request for HTTP, so that is basically getting data from the server, getting resources from the server. So everything that you get from the server uses get. And when you use get method in a form, it is still a URL that is being sent. It's just that attached to the URL at the end you will have a question mark key value pairs. Those are the queries that are being sent to the server. So once you have the whole URL, you can of course bookmark it and copy and paste it in WhatsApp or Telegram and send it to other people, etc. So that way it is easy to share. For instance, a search on Google uses a get form, and that can be sent to different people. But on the other hand, things like logging into a web page, etc., you don't really want to see your username and password in the URL if somebody is looking over your shoulder from behind. So those things will be posted. Actually, most things will be posted unless there is a reason for it to be sent as get. So in example 7, all we want to do is to create this little form and then type in something in that form and send it, and the target where it is being sent is a route on the server, and that route will be called process form, and that has to be implemented in server.js or in a router below server.js inside the routes folder. So that's what we will do. So we will have a form with a send button, and that form will be a static file called text form coming from the public folder served by express.static. And then we will actually send it to the server to a route, and that guy will handle it and then create the string customized to whatever name that you type in here. That's the idea. Now looking at figure number 2, can you see whether my method is get or post? It is actually get, because you can see the question mark here and the full name, which is the name of the field, and the value corresponding to it, Alex. So those things are there in the URL as a query string. So this is a get request. So let's take a look at that one. So example 6 is done. So let's kill this guy. Let's go to example 7. There, I don't want any of these things anymore. In 7 I have public, there I have text form. You can see that it's a form, method is get, as we saw from figure 2, and there is a text input, and the name of that text input, that text box, is a full name, and that's the one that will actually be handled in our route. And then there is just a submit button. Now let's take a look at server. There is a way of handling all static file requests, static resource requests, using this and express static. And then there's a special route, if there is a get request, why get? Because in the form you saw that this is get, so that is a get request. And where is the request going to? Again, it says action / process form. That means it's going to go here, and there I'm unpacking full name from request query. It has to be query because it comes in as a part of the query string. It is a get request. Get request means query, and then full name was unpacked there, coming from the request object, from the query object. The property called full name, as you can see, this full name is actually a dynamic property, meaning it depends on what it is that you set here. Right, so that's that. Let's launch this server after installing whatever it is that I need installed. Now let's go to, where's my form? It's in public text form, so I don't need to say public because that is the root of static resources. HTML file, I see this. I'm gonna say Alex sent, and it says, hi Alex, welcome to IS 113. Let's see where that is happening. So here, hi full name, which happened to be Alex, welcome to IS 113, and that's what took place. So that is example number 7. Now let's look at the details on the slides once more. So in the form, we had action specifying the route where the data should be sent, and the method get, that means it has to be server.get. If it was post, then it would have been server.post. And then there is an input box which actually corresponds to this orange thingy here, where we type in Alex. Then the green button, which is sent, coming from that button, type submit, send. The type there, I believe, is optional. You don't really need it. Okay, once you send it, since it's a process form, that is the action, get is a method, so it has to be .get, and there should be a route to handle that get request. And again, request and the response are the arguments. Request will contain full name because that is the same as this. That is the orange thing there. So request will contain an object called query as a property, which will contain a full name as a property, coming from the fact that you named it full name here. And that can be unpacked. And remember that I'm using backtick to actually create this string so that I can use dollar braces to put the value right there rather than using plus concatenation. So then I set a string using the backtick, and that is the one that will come back to you, and that will be displayed. So that's the whole chain. Now one more thing, this is going to be radio buttons. It's a gang of radio buttons. Radio buttons, as you know, you can choose only one of them. How does the browser know that when you select this guy has to be unselected? It knows it because they all have the same name. So let's take a look at that one. That will be in example number 8. Kill this, cd example 8. Again, npm install nodemon server. Kill this, go to example 8. Server.js, this is the one we want to look at. Again, static files will come from public, and watch this very carefully. You need this if you want to get data from a post request. So this is very important, and this just needs to be there. So you may not be able to memorize the whole thing, so you may want to keep it in one file somewhere, or you may need to remember that this is actually in example 8, just in case we don't give it to you in the lab test. But my understanding is that in the lab test we will give you the server with all the bare necessities. You will just need to embellish it with the routes. So this will most likely be there. Okay, so what we have in public is a radio button form. So this guy, and that will be handled here. So let's take a look at the radio button. The method is post, which is the reason why this guy needed to be there. And it is looking for a route process form as per before. So a process form route needs to be there, but it has to be a post request. So server.post, that one, and you are just getting the color this time. And now notice that it is not from the query, it is actually from the body. So let's look at this once more. Form action method post. There is an input type radio, name is color, another radio, name is color, another one, name is color, value is red, blue and green, and the text associated with also red, blue and green. So if you render this by going to this radio form.html, you get that. Now if I select red and then select blue, red gets unselected like that. And then I just say send. You have chosen green color, whatever color you have selected came up there. How did that happen? That magic is implemented here. Server.post, process form. Request is an object which has a property body which contains color, and that color is the value that you set here and sent. So the value was green and you sent it using post. The fact that it is green out here doesn't really matter. So just to show that to you, let me call this green just G, and this B, and this R. Okay, now it'll come here, it'll look for request body color. This time it'll be just G, then it'll say you have chosen G color. So let's save this here, reload this, go to green, send, you have chosen G color. One more thing I want to show you. Suppose I had called this color 1, color 2, color 3, which is wrong. It should not be like that. Suppose I had done that. What do you think will happen? Let me reload this now. I select red, then I go and select blue. That also stays selected, because for Chrome there is no way to know that these three guys are actually linked together. And the way it knows that they are linked together is if the names had been the same, which is why the names have to be the same. And if the names are the same, then they are linked. Let's look at the slide to just go through the explanation. So they all have the same name, they are all in one gang, and then there is a submit button. So this red statement there is absolutely essential. Last week there was a student who had this problem. She had commented out this statement which I didn't notice, and then I was trying to debug why this statement wasn't working, and I did a whole lot of stuff without realizing that this red statement had been commented out. So I lost a bit of face there, but such is life. Okay, so we did this completely, I believe. So the thing to remember is, first of all, this red statement, and then the fact that you have to use post, and thirdly the fact that the information will be there in the body, because post requests, the key value pairs are actually in the body of the request, not as a query string. As you can see here, there is no query string attached. Now the 9th example will be a drop down. So let's kill this, go to 9, and if that succeeds, let's npm install, and if that succeeds, let's nodemon server.js. Alright, now we should be here and we should have this server running. Example 8 server is not needed, radio form is not needed. Now let's look at drop-down form. That is this guy. As you know, it's a select that you have to use. Name is target. So when something is selected, the value is will be sent. This value will be sent if this guy is selected. So select creates a drop down with two options, and the first one will be called Google. And when you select Google, this is the value that will be sent if you click on the submit button. Nothing complicated there. So this is called drop down form. Say Google, and it actually goes there. It doesn't merely echo something, it actually goes there. How is that black magic done? Let's take a look at how this is implemented in server.js. So there is a static resource handler there, very good. And then there is a route. This time it's for get because our method was get. And it's process form again. Now request will contain query, target because target is the name of the select dropdown. And the value that will be sent will be either this or this. So if in our case we selected Google, so this will become the URL to Google because that's the value. That is a URL, google.com. And then I use this response.redirect. So that's another thing that you can use. You can actually redirect to target, or it could also be just a string there, and that will work, which is what happened there. Let's go back to the slides and go through this once more using the slide. So the select drop down, the orange thing is implemented there, and the blue and the green thing is the submit button. Very easy. And then the process form is the action handler. That should be a route, and it should be server.get. And inside the query, request query, what you will be looking for would be target because that's the name here. What you will get as the value of that property target would be whatever you set as value here. If you have selected Google, if you select this guy, obviously you will get that. And after that, in the response, I'm just redirecting the response to the target, which is either Google or SMU. Good. So that happens. Now there is a slightly more complicated exercise. I would highly recommend that you do this also. The lab test, the exercises are going to be even more complicated. So you really have to do this. So that is exercise 3. Now the last one is about form validation. So there is one way of doing it by saying required on the client side as an attribute. That means without specifying that, you will not be able to submit the form, and also you can specify the type. Chrome or whatever browser you're using will do some basic validation on the client side, but client side is not enough. You really have to do server side validation, because client side validation will happen only in the form that you create. But once you publish your form to the external world, people can look at the form and see that the route that you're submitting to is open to the whole world. So they can create their own forms with whatever validation or invalidation or whatever it is that they want, and then submit to the same route. That way they can actually break in, unless you have server-side validation too. So the thing is, if you have a text input, the corresponding key will be there, be it in a query or in a body. It's just that the value will be empty if you haven't typed in anything. But the moment you type in something, the value will of course be whatever value that you type in. On the other hand, if it is a radio button or checkboxes, then the key will not exist unless at least one of them is selected. So that is a tricky thing. So you have to make sure before checking the value of a key, you have to make sure that the key is there. So that makes it a bit tedious. So same thing with the checkboxes. And also another thing is that checkboxes, you can select multiple things, not just one. So the value that is coming to you could be just one string or an array of strings. So that also is something that needs to be handled on the server side. So we will do this in example 10, and once we do that in the code, we'll come back here and see how this is implemented and how it worked. So let's go to example 10. So kill this guy and go to example 10. If that cd succeeds, then npm install. If npm succeeds, then nodemon. Right, looks like everything succeeded. Now we don't need this, we don't need this. We will go to example 10 and we look at the server. And even before that, maybe we should look at the HTML. So we see that the method is post, and a bunch of checkboxes, a gang of checkboxes, all with the same name, topics. So they are grouped together and they have values, art, science, and tech. And the target, as usual, is process form. So that needs to be a route under server.post. So here we have static resources specified. Since you're using post, we need this guy and a post handler for this route. And I'm saying constant request body topics. And then I'm saying this. So that's the first attempt. So let's do that. Checkbox form, checkbox form, you get that. Suppose I select art and science, sent, very good. I like art and science. Now suppose I select art, science and technology, sent, very good. That also works. I like all of them. Now suppose I select only science, sent. Some problem. What happened here? Let's look at what the error is saying. It's saying that in line 18, topics.join is not a function. So join is a function that can apply, or is a method of topics if topics were an array. If it is an array, then that's got a join function, join method that can work. But at this point, topics is not an array. That is a problem. So first of all, let's do something to debug this. And we know what the problem is because I'm trying to teach you. Let's say if you did not know the problem, you're trying to debug it. One way of doing that is to probably say console.log topics at this point, and this guy doesn't really work. So let's comment that out for now. So server restarted, all good. Now I go back here, I reload. I don't need to reload it, but let me reload this anyway and select only science. So I get topic science. And if I selected art and science, send it, I get an array of 2 strings, which can be joined using a comma as a delimiter. That works fine. But a single thing cannot be joined. More than that, suppose I don't select anything at all, then it's undefined. So topics is not even defined. So that is a problem. You had to handle all these cases. because what you might get out of a body, which is the input that you're presenting using post, in topics may be either empty, undefined, or an array, or it could be a single string. So you have to handle these three cases. It would have been a lot better if they had designed it in such a way that if there was nothing, there's an empty array, and if it is just one element, then it's an array containing one element, or if it is multiple elements, then it's an array of multiple elements. If they had designed it that way, we wouldn't have had to do all this thing, but this is the way it was done. Maybe they had reasons best known to themselves that we are not privy to. Who knows? Alright, so this is one way of debugging it, or at least knowing what the problem is. Now, luckily for us, we can actually comment out this and uncomment the code below to handle this properly. So first thing saying, if topics is false, it's undefined. That means there is no selection. So you did not select any topics. That's what will be sent. If it is an array, then you have selected multiple topics and you can join. Otherwise, there's only a single element that is selected and you selected a single topic. So that's the way it is done. Now that I mentioned to you that it might have been better if this was an array, maybe you could actually figure out another way of doing this. I'll leave that to you as an exercise to stretch your imagination a little bit. But this is one very sound way of doing it anyways. Let's just make sure that it works. Checkbox, then select nothing. You did not select any topics. Select one guy, you select a single topic. Select two guys, multiple topics. Three guys, just to be thorough, art, science, and tech, all three of them. Perfect. You can see that happening here. Now let's go through the slides to make sure that we understand this once more. So topics, checkboxes that you saw, and as usual, since this is post, you need this guy and you need this route, but under post, and you should look for the information inside body. And if you just blindly join it, assuming that the user would select more than one, then of course you would be making an error, an assumption. Assume makes an ass of you and me, as they say. Right, so what you really have to do is to see if the variable topics is defined. This will turn out to be false if topics is not defined, meaning nothing was selected. So this came back undefined, and then you can give that message, and then you check whether it's an array using the method isArray, a static method from the array class running on this one. And so if it is an array, then you join the elements of an array using the delimiter that. So that is another method of an array topics dot join using this. And finally, if it is defined and it's not an array, then that means it's a single element, and then just echo that. Now, for your exercising pleasure, there is exercise number 4. Please do this one also on your own. So it's got form validation, input validation on the server side, and I'll go through it carefully and try to do this. With the help of this video, I'm hoping that you'll be able to breeze through these things very easily. So what have we learned? We learned how to set up a project using npm init, and how to install different modules, and what package.json is. It's just a data file. And then how to handle get and post requests corresponding to various form elements such as radio buttons, checkboxes, text boxes, etc. And some validation for checkboxes also. Dropdowns also, if you set a particular attribute called multiple, you have to do the validation there also. So thank you for your attention, and hope you do very well in your lab test.